Okay, so like I said, today we are starting with chapter 4. So just a quick recap of the earlier nutrition topics and the ones we did cover a little bit later as well. So the first thing that we looked at was what are nutrients. So remember, nutrients are substances. They can be food, they can be drinks, they can be things that are a little bit more difficult to define, things like water, for example. Any kind of substance that provides benefits for our body by nourishing our body, by helping us to grow, and by helping us to basically maintain life. In other words, to survive. Okay, now when we digest foods, the foods that we eat are broken down by our body, and our body takes the calories or the energy from that food, and it also takes the nutrients from that food. So obviously we know some foods have no nutrients at all, and there are other foods that are full of nutrients. Okay, so some foods like, for example, lollies don't really have much nutrients, whereas other foods such as eggs are full of nutrients. Okay, so depending on what food you're eating, that will really determine how much nutrients you're getting. So when we look at nutrients, there are 6 main categories of nutrients, or 6 groups of nutrients that we really require to grow in the best possible way and to have what we call as the most optimal health and well-being. Optimal health and well-being means the best possible health. So these are things that we all require regardless of our age. We need water, we need carbohydrates, and fiber comes under carbohydrates. Protein, we need fats, we need vitamins like your vitamin D, your vitamin B, all of those vitamins, and we need minerals. So minerals are like the things we require in kind of smaller amounts, not as much as your macronutrients, but like things like calcium, sodium, iron. We do require these in small amounts, and a lot of us don't even get these in enough amounts, especially things like iron and calcium. There are a lot of people who are deficient in iron or deficient in calcium. Okay, so those are basically your main groups of nutrients. So let's look at them in a little bit more depth. So the first one is carbohydrates. Now, what do you need to know about carbohydrates? Carbohydrates are basically your main source of fuel for your body. That means that when you go out and exercise, or you go out, and you do some kind of physical activity, the first thing that your body is going to start burning is your carbohydrates. Okay, those are basically your like glycogen stores, your blood sugar stores. So your body is going to first start to burn those carbohydrates, and carbohydrates also provide your body with immediate energy. So that's why you see, like, when people are running a marathon, they've got like little, people will throw them like a bottle of Gatorade or a little pouch that's filled with some kind of glucose solution, because that will provide them with some kind of immediate energy boost. Okay, and that's the reason why, some people who are low in energy, if you just give them a little lolly, they'll suddenly feel like a little bit more energetic, because it gives you an immediate boost of energy to your brain. Now, glucose is the preferred energy source for fueling the human body. 1 gram of carbohydrates provides about 16 kilojoules of energy, so that's approximately about 4 calories if you divide that by 4. And obviously, we know that carbohydrates, especially in today's world, do get a bad rep. Carbohydrates are important for you, but the problem, or the reason why they get a bad rep, is that we do overconsume carbohydrates. We consume far more than we require. And obviously, eating too many carbohydrates can lead to the carbs being stored as fat, okay? And when you have too much fat from eating too much carbs, that causes weight gain. So that's why it's important to remember that too much carbohydrates is not good for the body and can lead to things like weight gain. Okay, so you can connect overconsumption of carbohydrates to things like weight gain, things like obesity, being overweight. All of these things are connected. Now we have to remember that under carbohydrates, we also have another type of nutrient called fiber. Now, fiber is always like seen as a healthy thing, and fiber is a type of carbohydrate, and it's basically not absorbed by the body. So you find fiber in things like any kind of fruit, any kind of vegetable. Certain things have more fiber than others. For example, oats is likely to have more fiber than a piece of white bread. Same thing, like whole grain bread is likely to have more fiber than white bread. Spinach is likely to have more fiber than, like a mandarin or an orange. So again, it really depends. But whatever you're looking at, most of your fruits and vegetables do have quite good amounts of fiber. Now, what does fiber do? Fiber adds bulk to your food. It makes your food a lot more bulky, and it makes your food able to pass more smoothly or more easily through your digestive tract. And so it basically aids digestion, making sure you don't get bloated, making sure you don't get indigestion, and allows for good or normal bowel movements. And bowel movements are related to the process of excretion. Excretion is the process of excreting or getting rid of waste from the body. Okay, basically in simple words, pooping. So it helps you poop and it helps you digest your food. Now, obviously, for that reason, fiber can actually help you to prevent many diseases. It can, first of all, help you to prevent obesity, because foods that are high in fiber keep you full for a longer period of time and you're less likely to overeat. Because fiber also sticks to the cholesterol molecules in your body and helps to remove them from the body, a diet that's high in fiber is also likely to reduce the chances of things like heart disease or cardiovascular diseases. Okay. Now, some food sources, just know at least maybe two, okay? Just know two examples of food sources for each of these. So 2 examples of food source for carbs, very easy: bread, pasta, lollies, anything that's either grain-based or that's like kind of sweet or sugary in nature will usually have carbs. Okay, so that's basically our carbohydrates. Alrighty, now we can move on to the next one, which is protein. So protein is obviously important for repairing your bodily cells. So this is the reason why you see a lot of bodybuilders, a lot of people who are going to the gym kind of downing glasses of eggs that they've blended, or like, you know, protein shakes or whatever. Okay, those are basically supposed to help to build, maintain, and repair your bodily cells. But that's not just the case for people who bodybuild or people who go to the gym. All of us, in some way or the other, need to repair and replace our body cells. We all go through, you know, some kind of physical activity every day, whether it's just moving around the house or taking a little walk. You're still you know, using up those body cells. So the main function of protein is to build up those body cells, to maintain them, and to repair any body cells that, for example, micro tears in your muscles, or you know, any kind of strain or sprain that you've got as a result of physical activity. Now, protein is a secondary source of energy, which means that your body doesn't turn to protein as the first source of energy when it needs some kind of you know, boost or some kind of energy boost there. Obviously, carbohydrates, when your carbohydrates have all been used up, that's when protein comes into the picture and your protein starts to get used up as well. Okay, this could mean as well that that if you're using protein as a secondary energy source, that you are burning off your muscle. Again, for a lot of people, that can be problematic. 1 gram of protein gives you about 17 kilojoules of energy, which is kind of similar to carbs, to be honest. Now, obviously, in the same way as carbs, if you eat protein in excess amounts, excess means a lot, okay, a lot more than the normal amount, then that excess protein is going to be converted to fat. Now, the majority of us don't require that much protein. In fact, unless you are doing some kind of bodybuilding where you're exercising and lifting weights for like every hour of the day, you're not going to require to eat so much protein at every meal. Okay, so that's basically talking about the fact that protein, overconsumption of protein, can actually lead to overweight and obesity if you're not burning off that protein, or if you don't require to be eating that much in the first place. Okay, obviously, because proteins contain nitrates as well, your kidneys have to work extra hard to get rid of the nitrates from protein foods like meat and eggs and beans and stuff. So eating too much protein isn't very good for your kidneys as well. All right, so obviously protein is made up of small building blocks called amino acids. Now, amino acids are just like the little components that make up your proteins. And certain foods contain all the essential amino acids we need, and those include foods like meat, like what we've got in the picture here, that contains all your all your amino acids that you will require. And incomplete proteins do not contain all those essential amino acids. So basically, we find incomplete proteins in plant-based foods. So things like nuts and seeds and legumes like beans or lentils. These are the things that most of the vegetarians or vegans would probably consume. And it's one of the reasons why if you're following a diet like vegetarianism or veganism, then you are likely to be having probably not enough protein intake, okay? Or you're not getting in all those essential amino acids. Now, food sources of protein, again, just know at least 2. So it's very easy. Just you know, one type of meat. Don't be, try to make it specific. Don't just write meat, write what type of meat. So beef, lamb, goat, chicken, whole grain cereals, you know, you've got legumes, you've got nuts. There's so many sources of protein that we come across every day. So that's basically all you really need to understand for protein. The next slide is looking at fats. So obviously fats are also called lipids. Lipids are required for adequate health and development, especially in the younger years of your life, because you're still developing and your cells need that fat basically. In fact, certain vitamins like vitamin A and vitamin D, they actually, they can only be really absorbed by the body if you have like a normal amount of fat in the body, okay, because they are fat soluble vitamins. Now fats obviously are important because they maintain the structure of your cells, and fats, like I said, they do allow for the transport of certain minerals and vitamins in and out of cells. Now fats are kind of similar to carbs, but they provide a more richer and concentrated source of energy. So in other words, if you've got two people stuck on an island with no food, the person who is, in other words, who has a higher body fat percentage is going to probably be able to stake it out for a longer time than the person who has a very low body fat percentage, okay? Because they've got already fat stores in their body that their body can burn for energy, okay, as a backup source. Now, obviously, that doesn't mean we all just go get fat, because the chances of all of us being on an island, especially in this point of time, will be very, very, very low. But it just means that obviously fats are there because certain fats are important for you, okay? We can't just say all fats are bad. Yes, there are bad fats, but then there are good fats as well. And our good fats are usually the ones that you might see your parents using, like olive oil, almonds, you know, oily fish like salmon, avocado, all of these things that are healthy and, you know, are basically good sources of fat because they protect your heart rather than increasing the risk of you getting a heart disease or you getting increased cholesterol. So obviously there's 4 main types of fat. Like we said, we can divide them into good fats and bad fats. The bad fats are our saturated fats and our trans fats. Saturated fats, remember we talked about this in class, saturated fats usually come from animal foods. So any animal food you can think of and you name that food will probably most likely have, you know, saturated fat. So butter, cream, bacon, even meat, even the meat that your mum buys and cooks for the family or puts into the lasagna or the pasta, that would be usually high in saturated fat, okay, which isn't a bad thing. Like we said, we do need some amount of fat, just not eating it for every meal is the key here. Okay, unsaturated fats are usually kind of more plant-based foods. So things like olive oil, that's a plant-based food. Things like nuts and seeds, these come from plant-based foods. Avocados are a fruit. Yes, they're a fruit. Okay, so yeah, these are more plant-based, and so for that reason, they are unsaturated, okay, or mono or polyunsaturated. Alrighty, a little bit more detail now about the, let me just scribble out what I've done. Okay, so the good fats, why are they good? Because they help to reduce your levels of cholesterol, thus protecting your heart and promoting your heart health and the health of your blood vessels. In other words, monounsaturated fats like olive oil, peanuts, salmon, all of these things, what they really help us is that they actually protect us against, against CVD. So remember, CVD stands for cardiovascular disease. Cardio meaning heart, vascular meaning blood vessels. So they protect us from diseases of the heart and the blood vessels. Now, food sources, I've already talked about some of the examples. You can just pick any 2 and just learn them. Now, polyunsaturated fats are made up of omega-3 and omega-6, and what they do is that they basically help us to lower the bad cholesterol. So you might have heard on TV, or you might have heard in previous years when you study health, you know, that there are 2 types of cholesterol, good cholesterol and bad cholesterol. Good cholesterol is obviously the type that we want to have more of. Bad cholesterol is one we want to reduce. Now, if we eat diets that are high in saturated fat, obviously our bad cholesterol is going to get to a very high level. And so what we need to do is we need to eat foods that are high in polyunsaturated fats. And these are foods such as, you know, nuts, salmon, tuna, all of these things are really good for us and will protect our heart health, okay? So obviously just remember that in general, both monounsaturated and polyunsaturated fats are good fats, and that in general, they do promote the health of the heart and the health of the blood vessels. And in doing so, they protect us against diseases related to the heart and related to the blood vessels. Okay, and just remember 2 food sources for each one. Okay. Next slide. Now, what are the bad fats then? The bad fats are our saturated and trans fats. So like I said before, saturated and trans fats are bad because they do have a negative impact on your heart health. And for that reason, they can contribute to cardiovascular disease. In other words, heart disease. Now, a lot of the saturated fats that we see, like I said before, they come from animal foods. A lot of them are also solid at room temperature. So what this means is that pretty little cupcake that you bought from the store that has icing on it that just doesn't seem to melt, it's probably because the icing is full of trans fats, okay? Saturated fats, I've already talked about this, they come from animal-based foods. Trans fats are artificially created, so they're created when liquid oil is goes through this process where it kind of binds with hydrogen atoms and it becomes hydrogenated. And so if you've ever looked at the back of an ingredient label, you'll notice that it might say something like hydrogenated vegetable oil. That essentially means vegetable oil that has become a trans fat. Okay, so whenever you see the word hydrogenated in an ingredient label, do not buy that food product. That would be extremely bad for your health. Okay, in fact, trans fats are what we call as the worst fat. Okay, saturated fats are the bad fat, but trans fats actually go up one level and are even worse than saturated. Now, along with having the same effects as saturated fats, trans fats are even worse for you because they actually can lead to a higher risk of developing diabetes, because they actually really mess up your blood glucose levels, okay, or your blood sugar levels. So this means that trans fats not only increase the risk of your heart disease, like saturated fats do, they also play a role in bringing on type 2 diabetes, okay? And this is the reason why people with diabetes should avoid things like sweets and cupcakes and commercially baked things. If you make it at home, obviously you can make it a bit healthier, but the ones that you buy in the stores are generally, generally high in trans fats. Alrighty, so now we're up to 4.3, looking at the kind of the other minerals and water, okay, and why we need this during the youth stage. So what is water? We obviously know that water does make up a big part of the human body. Now, how much water we need is going to be dependent on how much activity we do, how big we are in terms of our height and our weight, our metabolism, as well as the weather. So if you live in a climate that's a lot more hot, you're going to sweat a lot more, and you are going to be losing water through your perspiration or through your sweat. So you have to drink more water according to that. Now, water is important for a few reasons, which are kind of represented by these little ticks on the slide. You don't need to know all of those, even though most of them are kind of common sense, but just maybe know at least 2, okay? So just pick any 2 from that slide and then just learn them. Most of them are common sense, like I said. We all know water protects us against dehydration. We all know that water, helps us to have more smooth or regular bowel movements, because when you don't drink water, you become constipated. It's kind of like common sense. Another thing that you might not know is that water actually supports the management of healthy weight, and it does prevent things like water retention. Water retention is that feeling like you're bloated, but you haven't really eaten much, but you feel really bloated and blah. Okay, so that's basically another thing that water does. And like we discussed at the beginning, as nutrients are required for a lot of the chemical reactions in our body, water is one of the main ones, okay? Without water, a lot of the chemical reactions in our body cannot occur. Now, food sources for water obviously, duh, but we've also got some other food sources, okay? We've got things like watermelon, tomato, any kind of fruit or vegetable that is high in water, okay? That's watery in nature. Also, if you ever ask for a food source of water, you can mention things like tea, coffee, soup, okay? All of these things are high in water, okay, and they all provide you with some kind of water content. In fact, a lot of people think that when doctors and stuff say, or there's this common knowledge, oh, you have to drink 8 cups of water a day. That doesn't necessarily mean water. It could be 8 cups of any fluid that do provide you with some kind of benefit there. It doesn't mean drink 8 cups of Coke. It just means like you could have 3 cups of water, 2 cups of soup. You could have some watermelon, which also provides you with water. So again, it really depends on how you balance it out. it's just important to get that fluid into your system. What have I done now? Okay. Next one is calcium, right? So calcium is basically the mineral that's very important for strengthening our bones. It's helping us to build strong bones and teeth. And it's basically helping to mineralize, okay? We use the word mineralize your bones and your other hard tissues. What we mean by mineralize is to make those bones stronger and full of like rigidity, okay, without being like weak and porous and brittle. Now, obviously, when you're young, that's the stage of your lifespan when you are going to be, you know, developing the most, okay? And you obviously need to consume calcium in good amounts to make sure that your bones don't end up very brittle and very weak as you get older. So the greater the bone density, and bone density is basically another way of saying how full your bones are, or how rigid, or how strong, okay, how basically sturdy your bones are. That's bone density. Okay, how dense your bones are. The more bone density that you achieve in youth, the lower will be your chances of developing osteoporosis. And remember, we said osteoporosis is this kind of condition that you can develop later on in life, where your bones start to become very porous. Porous means they start to form like little holes in the bone structure. And then if you were to trip or fall over, you might be likely to have a crack in your hip, or have a crack in some part of your body there, because your bones are just so brittle and so weak. So if we ever give you a question that says, okay, explain or identify one condition that may result from an underconsumption of calcium, you can talk about osteoporosis. In fact, osteoporosis is a disease or condition that is related to both the underconsumption of calcium as well as vitamin D. Okay, so it goes for two conditions rather than just one. Okay, so like I said, yeah, osteoporosis is a must. We've already looked at that. Now, food sources of calcium. So food sources of calcium are things like milk, cream, cheese, you know, the basic stuff, any kind of dairy product. If you're looking at like non-dairy products, well, bony fish, because when you eat the bones of another animal, obviously those bones have calcium. So bony fish, green leafy vegetables, so spinach, broccoli, and certain types of soy milk don't naturally have calcium, but they add calcium to them in manufacturing processes. So that's one thing you can talk about. Dairy is obviously the best source of calcium that you can have. For example, drinking milk, having yogurt, that's the most rich source of calcium. But you can get it from other sources. The only problem is you'd have to consume a lot of spinach compared to just one glass of milk to get the same amount of calcium. So there can be problems with consuming too much spinach and too much other things as well. So things like oxalic acid in spinach, if you consume too much spinach, that will actually do the opposite effect of stopping calcium absorption. So it's always best to try to stick to dairy or non-dairy alternatives. Like nowadays, things like almond milk have a lot of calcium in them. Things like, you know, other kinds of soy milks, they all have calcium added to them in the manufacturing process. So even if you are lactose intolerant, it's something you don't have to give up. Okay, sodium. So sodium is obviously connected to our fluids in our body. It kind of balances out the fluid to make sure that we've got a proper amount of fluid retention and not too much fluid retention. Why is fluid retention a problem? Because when we have too much fluid retention, it's indicating that there's a problem with our blood volume, okay? And too much fluid retention can not only look bad from the outside because you look super bloated and super puffed up, but it can also mean that your blood volume is increasing, and blood volume increasing is actually really bad because it can increase the risk of things like high blood pressure and other heart conditions. So obviously sodium helps to balance out that healthy amount of fluid going into the cells as well as fluid leaving your cells. And if you consume foods that are high in sodium, you might realize that after you've consumed that food, your mouth feels really dry or you feel really thirsty. Okay, this is the reason why, you know, after you eat pizza and you drink like something afterwards, you feel really good, like you feel like your thirst or something has been quenched. That's because sodium actually has this thing of drawing out water from your body, okay? And when you eat foods that are higher in sodium, your body actually has to take any existing water that's in the body and draw that into the cell. So when excess fluid is drawn out of the cell, this increases your blood volume. contributing to a higher risk of high blood pressure. So this is the main condition connected to sodium. It can also contribute to stroke and heart attack in the long term, okay? Some examples of food sources of sodium. So again, just know at least two. Salt by itself is a food source. You can talk about any kind of fast food. So things like pizza, pies, all that kind of stuff, pickles, anything that's high in salt or salty in nature will have a high amount of sodium. Okay, iron. So iron is basically important for you because it carries the oxygen around your body. And iron is that part of the blood that forms the heme component of your red blood cells. So as you get older and as your blood volume increases and the amount of blood that your body is transporting around is increasing, you're going to require more iron to ensure that each of your cells gets the amount of oxygen that it needs. So iron deficiency is when you don't have enough iron. It's when you underconsume iron or you have some kind of imbalance there. And that is known as anemia. Okay, so if you underconsume iron, the condition that you're going to develop is called anemia. Now, anemia causes an individual to feel tired and weak. Okay, they often look pale. They look like they don't have enough energy. A simple task like going up a flight of stairs or moving from class to class could make them feel tired enough to, feel dizzy or faint. Okay, so this is a pretty big issue, and anemia has a wide range of impacts on your well-being. Okay, females in general, because of, biological functioning processes like menstruation, pregnancy, childbirth, all that stuff, they do lose a lot of blood. So females are actually more likely to have anemia than males. And a lot of females are also involved in diets where they're trying to lower their calorie intake and they might be eating less red meat or less iron-rich foods. Okay, the best source of iron, similar to protein, the best source of iron is going to be from your red meat. So goat, lamb, beef, all of those have really good iron, which is what we call as bioavailable. Bioavailable means it's very easy for your body to absorb the iron in those foods compared to other foods. Now, obviously, if you are eating red meat, you have to choose red meat that isn't too high in fat. You do need to try to mix it up and get iron from other sources as well. Okay, but obviously being young, you can consume some meat there without worrying too much about the saturated fat. Okay, iron from, obviously, when we are eating, the photo here that I wanted to point at is a piece of steak with orange juice. Okay, just remember that photo in your head, because if we ever ask you what is the name of the nutrient that will help iron absorption, you should be able to say vitamin C. So remember the orange juice, remember the vitamin C. Vitamin C foods or vitamin C will help you to absorb iron better from your food, and it will help to maximize the iron absorption. So you're getting the most iron out of eating that steak. Okay, 4.4. So now we're just going to continue looking at some vitamin D, and we're looking at the B group vitamins. So vitamin D, we know, comes from the sun, but we can't eat the sun, so we need to get it from food as well. So this is basically what we're looking at in this slide here. So vitamin D is a helper for calcium. It helps calcium to basically better build up the bones and build up the mineralization of your hard tissues. A lack of vitamin D can both lead to calcium getting less absorbed, as well as weaker bones and teeth. So bones that break very easily, teeth that are quite brittle or that chip very easily, those are signs of low vitamin D. And because of that, also low calcium. Now, when you are outside and you're getting vitamin D, that's obviously a good source. But again, with Australia's sun and, the ozone layer and all that stuff, you are also putting yourself at a higher risk of skin cancer if you're not wearing the proper sun protection and sunscreen. So it's important to remember that you can also get vitamin D from foods, okay? Foods like fish, liver, so cheese, egg yolk, mushrooms, okay? All of these foods are high in vitamin D or have a good source of vitamin D. Some people whose vitamin D is extremely low, and I think this is the case for a lot of people in Australia, usually they are prescribed tablets. You don't need a prescription, you can just go buy them, they're just on the shelf. And these supplements can actually be taken every day or every week, and they can actually kind of help to keep your vitamin D in check as well. So that's what vitamin D does. It just helps to absorb calcium and works with calcium to build up your bones and your teeth. Now, your B group vitamins are all to do with energy and metabolism, so they help to convert your fuels into energy. So when we're looking at what are the problems that can come from not having enough B1, B2, and B3, that's basically going to be low energy. So very similar symptoms to an iron deficiency here. You're going to have a lack of energy and your growth is also going to be slowed. Okay, so food sources that are rich in B group vitamins include Vegemite. Okay, you might have seen the ads about Vegemite being an energy boosting kind of spread. Any kind of whole grain cereal or bread. So this includes things like oats. This includes things like whole grain bread, eggs, leafy green vegetables, and milk. Milk is very important. And that's why a lot of young children, after they start solids, they actually, the best kind of beverage to start them on is, milk, cow's milk or whatever milk you want, because milk is a very good source of B group vitamin as well. And they're still growing, so they need that. Now, with some B vitamin foods, they actually don't do well under cooking. So if you, for example, cook kale for too long, the B vitamins in the kale or the spinach might actually reduce. So it's kind of better to have them in a salad, kind of like semi-raw or like semi-cooked, but not like fully cooked. Okay, so those are your B groups. So B1, B2, and B3. Now, folate is an example of vitamin B9. We usually call it folate, but vitamin B9 is folate or folic acid. Okay, this is mainly important for development of the spinal cord, and it's basically important for growth as well, and for making sure that the fetus comes out like with a normal kind of posture, normal structure then. Okay, so it does play a role in DNA synthesis or the synthesizing of that genetic material. Obviously, when we talk about folate, people can get folate deficiency anemia, similarly to how people get iron deficiency anemia. And this has the same symptoms. So it can make the person feel tired, and it can make the person feel, like they don't have enough energy. Now, when folate is added to foods, this makes a food fortified, okay? And fortified means that that food didn't naturally have folate, but that folate has been added to the food. And you see this with a lot with like breakfast cereals, where they will, in the nutritional panel, folate will be one of the ingredients there. So if you are extremely deficient, and this is mostly a problem for pregnant women who need to have enough folic acid, then your doctor can prescribe you folic acid tablets. Okay, and folic acid comes up, or folate comes up in a lot of foods as well, like chicken, spinach, eggs, and those fortified breakfast cereals and breads that we were talking about before. So folate is important to make sure that there's normal development of the brain, spine, and skull, so that children don't come out with spina bifida or neural tube defects, which are basically where the spine is crooked or the spine isn't normally developed. Okay, and all doctors, regardless of who you are, if you are, in Australia and you're pregnant, all doctors will automatically check your folate levels and make sure that they give you these tablets, because not having folate can increase the risk of that condition for the baby. Okay, so that's basically, and that little, like a little picture of that birth defect thing I was talking about is shown here in that second picture. Okay, next to poor growth, birth defect is when the neural tube or the spinal tube is crooked. And so it kind of essentially means the child is going to grow up with almost like a hunchback. It's not going to be like a proper posture there. Okay. Vitamin B12. So vitamin B12 is basically, it plays a role in building up your red blood cells and ensuring that your blood cells are, not just in correct quantities, but also in the correct structure or shape, okay? Because if your red blood cells are not in the correct shape, they're not going to be able to transport that oxygen in the best way possible around the body. Now, vitamin B12 does work with folate in order to perform the above function. So you can see iron, vitamin B12, and folate, they're all working together here in terms of helping the red blood cells. Now, having a deficiency of vitamin B12 can also increase your chances of becoming anemic. So in the same way that you can be anemic for folate and iron, you can also become anemic for vitamin B12 as well. Now, most food sources of vitamin B12 tend to be meats, whether that's fish, whether that's red meat, okay, usually animal-based products. So similarly to saturated fats, similarly to protein, we do find the most rich vitamin B12 foods as being animal-based products. So obviously, because of this, vegans or vegetarians who don't eat meat, probably more so vegans, because vegetarians eat fish and eggs, at least some of them. Vegans who don't eat any kind of animal products at all are most at risk of developing vitamin B12 deficiency. So remember, vitamin B12 deficiency can lead to a form of anemia. Okay, so feelings of tiredness, lack of energy, feeling lethargic, all of those symptoms. Okay, almost done. So we've got 4.5 now. So food selection models and other tools to promote healthy eating among youth. So these are basically the different types of what's it called? Models or diagrams that we use to understand how to choose a healthy diet. The first one is food selection models. So food selection models help youth to select foods that will meet their nutritional requirements and will meet basically their diets, to make sure they're getting the best out of what they eat. And they're not just for young people. So all these food selection models we look at in this spread are for anybody. Okay, essentially what these food selection models try to achieve is that they want us to choose healthy foods. They want us to show the wide variety of foods that are available and have an easier way of choosing those foods, because not everyone has really good nutritional knowledge or health literacy to make those decisions for themselves. A lot of us do need a little diagram or a model that will help us to choose our diet. So the most common one that we see in a lot of primary school staff rooms is the Australian Guide to Healthy Eating. Okay, the Australian Guide to Healthy Eating is most commonly used because it's so easy to understand. You look at it, you see the big part of portions of the graph dedicated to things like vegetables, the smaller portions of the graph dedicated to things like oil. It literally says only sometimes and in small amounts. It doesn't use difficult words. It doesn't use difficult vocabulary. There's nothing technical about it. Okay, and with this version of the Australian Guide to Healthy Eating, which is the most recent one, it actually shows you pictures of food. Like, okay, if I go to Coles and I have no idea what a red cabbage is, and my dietitian or my doctor says, okay, that's the red cabbage that's high in fiber and antioxidants, you got to buy that one, I will know. I'll be able to match it up with the one I see in Coles. Okay, so that's why some of the reasons why the Australian Guide to Healthy Eating is so successful is because it visually represents food in terms of a pie graph. So we can see, okay, which ones we need to eat the most of, which groups we need to eat less of. And it's colorful, it's attractive. We can print this as an A1 or A2 poster, put it up anywhere we want. And it's easy to understand both for children as well as non-English speakers. So if you don't speak English, but you still want to improve your diet, you can look at the pictures and you can understand that this is what I got to eat. Also, this recent version of the Australian Guide to Healthy Eating actually shows examples of cultural foods. So it kind of acknowledges that Australia is a multicultural country, looking at foods like Hokkaido noodles, okay, which is very common in Asian cuisine, couscous, which is very common in Mediterranean diets, rice, which is common for everyone, I suppose, pita bread, okay, tofu. There's so many different options here, which kind of tries to include some cultural options as well. So that's basically what the Australian Guide to Healthy Eating is. The Health Star rating system, we did cover this in class. Remember, we looked at a video as well about it. The Health Star rating system is a really good system as well. It does have its advantages and disadvantages. It's basically a type of food selection tool which shows us out of 5 stars how healthy a food is based on the amounts of saturated fat, sodium, fiber, any added sugars or processed sugars that are in there, and it gives it a score. Okay, obviously that's going to give us a really good indication, a quick indication. I don't even have to turn the box. I just look at the box on the shelf, and right on the front of the box is the score. So I might be more likely to buy a box of all brand compared to Cocoa Pops. The problem with this is, and we covered this in class, is that some companies can't afford to have the Health Star rating displayed. It's not like it's free. Companies have to opt in and pay a fee to the government to actually have this star displayed. And so you might actually forego a brand of cereal, or you might say, no, I'm not buying that. But they might actually have a higher star rating than Cocoa Pops, but you just don't buy it because they couldn't afford to display that star rating there. Now, the Health Star rating system is also not always super exact. I mean, Cocoa Pop, it's just literally sugar. Like, where's the 2 stars coming from? And remember, we looked at an example of a packet of lollies in class that had 0.5 stars. Something like a packet of lollies. There's literally nothing in there that is healthy, but why are you giving it 0.5 stars? So it doesn't make sense in a way for some food products. Okay, but it's good. The advantage of it is that it does help young people. It's a starting point. Okay, any starting point is better than no starting point. So if you're a young person and you want to be healthy, this is a good way for you to start. Okay, remember, we can't assume that everyone knows how to read a complicated nutritional panel at the back of a box. Okay, this is a starting point. The healthy eating pyramid. So the healthy eating pyramid is basically focused on improving your nutritional intake. It's very similar to the Australian Guide to Healthy Eating, except it represents everything in the form of a pyramid. So you guys might have even made a model of this in primary school. Okay, so you've got your most eating foods, which are your vegetables and legumes at the bottom, as well as a bit of fruit there as well. Then you've got in the middle, you've got your grains, your milk, yogurt, cheese are kind of divided into halves here. And then you've got your meat on one side. And then you've got your healthy fats, which is, you know, at the top. It's kind of, don't have too much of it, but you can use it to boost the taste of your other foods. It also has an indication that says choose water as the best beverage to hydrate yourself, limit salt and sugar, enjoy herbs and spices as compared to just salt. Okay, so that's basically the healthy eating pyramid. It's good because it shows us the different food groups and approximately how much we need to eat from each of them. And it also gives us a little bit of extra advice, like limit your salt and sugar, enjoy herbs and spices, choose water, be active every day. It includes the role of physical activity there as well. Okay, so that's basically the healthy eating pyramid is created by Nutrition Australia, which is a non-government organization, okay? And remember, the Australian Guide to Healthy Eating, which we looked at in a few slides back here, is created by the actual Australian government. Both of them are important for us, and as well as the Health Star rating, because they help young people and give young people a starting point through which they can then do further research and learn more about how to eat healthy and how to make healthier food choices. And I've already explained these in the previous thing when I was going over the pyramid, but this is just a zoomed in version for you to see things more clearly, see which foods are mentioned. You can see some similarities, like couscous again is mentioned here as a grain. Again, acknowledging that there are a wide variety of foods that if I can't drink milk and I'm lactose intolerant, well, I've got soy milk. That's another option for me. Okay, so I've just kind of listed the the nutrients that are found in some of the layers in this slide. I'm not going to go through it now, but you can go through it in your revision time. Okay, last slide, 4.6, because obviously from 4.7, like I said before, we already have Zoom recordings from the e-learning time. So I'm just going to cover 4.6 and then we're done for today. So 4.6 is looking at the consequences of nutritional imbalance. So what happens if I have too much of a nutrient and what happens if I have too little of a nutrient? So what is nutritional imbalance? Well, nutritional imbalance is basically it's basically some kind of deficiency or overconsumption that's caused by your body either not being able to absorb those nutrients properly. So you are eating a lot of calcium, but for some reason your body just cannot absorb that calcium. Or it can result from a poor diet. You're just eating crap, basically. So either you're eating too little or too much of a certain nutrient. That's when nutritional imbalances come up, because if you look at nutrition as a seesaw, the nutrition, it's not balanced, okay? You're eating too much junk food and not enough healthy food. So that's what the imbalance is about. Now, generally, Australians do not eat the recommended number of fruits and vegetables. We know this because we generally don't consume high amounts of fiber. So this is something we've got to consume more of. In terms of what we can consume less of, things like saturated fat, sodium, we have so much of those and we don't require any more than what we already have. Okay, so short-term consequences, just going to quickly run through this. So we've already talked about carbohydrates, that when we eat too much carbohydrates, it can lead to weight gain in the short term. Because obviously if you're eating a lot of carbohydrates, any carbs that are not burnt off or broken down as energy will convert to fat, okay? And excess consumption of carbohydrates, particularly simple carbohydrates like lollies or cakes or, you know, those kinds of things are high in glycemic index and they really rapidly increase your blood sugar, which essentially means that you are going to be able to, you're not going to be able to regulate your blood sugar very easily there. Okay, B group vitamins are involved in the production of energy and metabolism. Now, obviously, if you don't have enough B group vitamins, what's going to happen? You're not going to have enough energy levels. So that's going to affect your physical health and well-being. Okay, so that's basically what happens if you don't have enough carbs and if you have too much carbs and if you don't have enough B group vitamins. If you don't have enough fiber, you're going to have problems with your bowel movements, basically not going to have constipation, you are going to have a lot of issues with the digestion of your food, and you are going to overeat because you don't have a feeling of fullness. Water, if you don't have enough water, it's obviously you are going to have issues with feeling very dizzy because you're not hydrated. You're going to have headaches, you're going to have low blood pressure. Okay, water is very important for hydrating the body and for aiding chemical reactions like digestion and things. Long-term consequences. So long-term consequences are basically looking at things like sugar. Okay, we know young people in Australia have a lot of sugar intake. So this is going to increase the risk of cavities in your teeth. And this is also going to increase the risk of other issues like poor self-esteem, bullying, okay, all of these things that affect the other dimensions. If you have too much carbs, too much fats, and too much proteins, which is often the case with Australian young people, you will obviously be at a long-term consequence of overweight and obesity because you don't get obese overnight. It's something that happens over time, okay? And again, overweight or obesity are connected with a range of other dimensions on your health and well-being, which you can look at here. But some of the diseases are like heart disease, type 2 diabetes, all of those diseases, as well as other social health issues like bullying and mental health, like poor self-esteem. Okay, now when we're looking at underweight is a problem because it's connected to your eating disorders like anorexia or bulimia. If you are underweight, you're likely to have poor growth and poor development. Your bones are likely to be very weak. Your teeth are likely to be very weak as well. And on top of that, issues like hair falling out, feeling very weak and lack of energy, all of that stuff can also occur. If you have a deficiency of iron, folate, or vitamin B12, that can all contribute to some kind of anemia. Anemia is when your blood cannot carry enough oxygen around the body. Okay, and this can then lead to tiredness and weakness. And obviously, as a result of that, you're not going to be able to go out with your friends. You're not going to be able to go to school. You have low self-confidence. So it affects all the dimensions of health and well-being. Okay, so know at least one disease for each of the dietary imbalances and make sure you can explain how that dietary imbalance contributes or leads to that disease. So we're almost done. Just give me another minute. Essentially what that means is that if you say, okay, excess consumption of carbohydrate can lead to obesity, you can't just make that statement. You have to explain how does it then lead to obesity. Okay, so just make it clear. Same thing that if you say, okay, increased saturated fat intake can increase the risk of heart disease, how does it increase the risk of heart disease? So bring in the explanation about the cholesterol levels increasing, or if you're linking it to sodium and high blood pressure, talk about the blood volume increasing, okay? And the heart has to work a lot harder to pump the blood around the body. So make sure that you link it to those explanations rather than just giving me blanket statements without giving the actual health-related explanation. Okay, so that's about it. So 4.7, we've already got the recording for that on the Zoom. I will post all of these recordings for chapter 4 in a folder, and I'll post the link to that on Social Stream. But yeah, that's it for today. So if you want to leave now, if you don't have any other questions, you can leave. Anyone who has questions, I will stay back for another